All right, and welcome to Psyched for Careers, the career show for the University of Wisconsin Green Bay Psychology Program. I almost said podcast, and then I almost said Psyched for grad school, so I'm really doing well so far. So we have the career show for the University of Wisconsin Green Bay Psychology Program. I'm Ryan Martin, chair of the psychology program here at UW Green Bay.
And I'm Chris Vespi. I'm a faculty member in psychology and human development here at UW Green Bay, and I'm on sabbatical this semester. So for one thing, miss you guys out there to all of our students, but for another, I've discovered that my vocabulary and my speaking skills have just declined.
Is that what you're saying? Or did I just assume?
You just assumed, but it's okay. It's
no,
all right. I'm not hurt.
For the record, I hadn't noticed, so that's good. So we're going to talk, speaking of skills, speaking and skills and things like that, we're going to talk a little bit about getting a good job reference. And so I wanted to kick things off there. For students who are looking for a job reference and they want to use an instructor or faculty member, how do they get a good one?
Great question. And we've talked about references before. This is going to be some different kind of information. I think that what's important to start out with is understanding what a job reference is going to be for you at this point. In many cases in the past, you've provided what we would talk about as character references. So you might have used your next door neighbor or a pastor or someone like that who could just speak to the fact that you're not going to rob someone, that you seem like a decent person, all these sorts of things. For the jobs that you're going to apply to out of college, they're going to want professional references, not character references. And so in many cases, you're going to be asking a professor. Here's the thing. What jobs are going to do is they're going to ask us questions, and they're scripted questions that they ask all references about every applicant, and it's not going to be about your grades. It's more likely that we're going to get questions about things like your maturity, your capacity to handle stress, your attention to detail, how do you get along with others, how well do you work in groups, what are your leadership skills like, all of these sorts of things that we're not testing you on in class.
Yep. Well, and I think that's important because students oftentimes will write me or call me and say, can I use you for a reference? And in doing so, they'll maybe remind me, hey, I got an A in your class or something, which is true. And you know, that's going to be a piece of the puzzle, but just a piece, right? There's a lot more to it. So what more is it that students can sort of demonstrate in class?
Well, I think in class you have an opportunity to demonstrate some of these things like your interpersonal skills and your leadership skills. And you may not be aware of some of the things that actually we notice and that you can do. So, you know, when we have you do small group work in class, even if we're standing up at the front of the classroom, I don't want to scare anyone, but you'd be a little appalled by what we can hear, probably. And so even if I'm standing at the front of the class, I'm actually listening in on different groups, but I'm not necessarily wanting to stand right over you and make you all nervous as I do that. And I can tell who is keeping the group on task. I can tell which groups are on task and which ones are talking about the movie that they saw last night. So you can do things like show your leadership and show your interpersonal skills in doing that. I also, when you have group projects, typically we have you evaluate your group members. Doing well in those group projects, that gives me a sense of your ability to work in groups, and not the grade that your group got, not the A we got on the project. Maybe you did get an A on the project, but maybe all your group members said that you didn't pull your weight. Well, that's not going to help.
Right.
What are some things that you notice?
I mean, that's one of the things. So I think sometimes we talk about kind of getting noticed in class and getting noticed in a good way, you know. And so, you know, so how are some ways can you get noticed in a good way? And I think of things like being organized, being involved in saying positive things in the class discussions, students who ask interesting questions where you can tell that they're really being thoughtful about the material. Those are all things that students do that help them get noticed in a good way. And then of course there's getting noticed in a bad way, right? There's the stuff that is going to be a little bit toxic is too strong a word, but the kinds of things that, if they happen once, not the biggest deal, but if they happen a lot, then it starts to you start to get noticed in a bad way. So habitual lateness, not following directions, things like that. So I think those are all ways where students can kind of get noticed in a not so good way that ends up standing out and potentially hurting a reference.
Yes. And you know, here's a small thing that you may not even think about. But one of the things as an instructor, I notice are students who have good attending skills in class.
Yes.
And so when I'm looking out at the class and I'm talking, are they looking back at me? Sometimes are they, nodding and smiling, like, oh, good professor, good professor. Believe it or not, it is reinforcing. But it's not about reinforcing the professor, it communicates to me that you're listening.
Right.
And so when I'm asked about things like maturity and responsibility and whatnot, you're not a student who's there just putting in your time, but you're a student who seems to really be there wanting to get the most out of the experience. On the other hand, again, I don't know that toxic can be is the right word, but again, I said I'm on sabbatical. I have no language anymore.
She's got an excuse. I do not have an excuse.
Oh, we always have excuses. But if what I notice, and really we do notice, even if we don't say it, is that you're texting throughout class and putting the phone underneath the desk, it doesn't hide it. It really doesn't. That communicates a very different message about your engagement in your own learning.
Yep. Two quick stories I wanted to share, actually, both of which happened today. One is I had a student who I was explaining something. She was attending really well, and when I was done, she raised her hand and said, "Do you think you could try and explain that in a slightly different way?" And that tells me that the student, it was okay that she didn't quite understand it yet, but that she cared about it and wanted to understand it. And so that's a student getting noticed in a way that I think is really positive, and that this is a student who cares and wants to know more. She paid attention, she did her best, she didn't quite get it. Can I explain it? Another great example too, I got an email today from a student about some class logistics sort of thing, and one of the things she said in the email is, I already checked the syllabus and I didn't see anything in there about this, which sends the message to me that she's tried, that she's looked at the syllabus, that she understands that reading the syllabus is important. She's done that. Didn't work for me. So it tells me that she understands that those things are important. And I think those are really good examples of students kind of standing out in a good way as diligent, responsible. I still have questions, and we don't want you to not ask questions.
Exactly.
We want you to ask questions, but then kind of frame those questions in a way that is really positive. Like that.
Yeah. So. And keep in mind, I think a lot of students would think about those examples as, oh my gosh, I can't do that.
Right.
The professor's going to think badly about me. No, I'm with you. And you might feel self-conscious about admitting that you didn't understand something or that you don't know something, but when done in that way, it is such a positive message.
Right.
Another really just practical kind of a thing that I would suggest, particularly for transfer students, I know this is really hard for folks, but the first thing we will be asked about on the reference is how long have we known you and how well do we know you?
Right.
And if what I have to say is, well, I've known you for a semester,
Right.
and I know you not very well, they're not going to take terribly seriously a word that I say after that. And so it's really important that you try to take more than one class with a professor if you can, or find a way to engage, if it's PhD club, if it's some other way to be able to engage with that professor, to keep in touch after a class is over. So try to do that. The other extreme that I sometimes see is that a student really likes a professor, and then they almost what I call major in that professor, like they're getting a major in Professor Martin instead of psychology, right? Because
they take all of those classes, right?
Okay, and that's great.
I'd be a great reference for that person.
Be an awesome reference.
But you need more than one.
But you need more than one. Typically, it needs 3.
Right.
And that can really create headaches for people. Yep. So just important to think about.
Yep. Absolutely. I do think, just to reiterate that before we finish up here, I do think it's always important for students, your time at GB is actually relatively short in the grand scheme of things. It may not feel that way now, but I always think it's important for students to kind of hit the ground running. And I would say that with transfer students, because their time is even shorter, it ends up being even a little more important to kind of hit the ground running and trying in your first semester to say, no, I got to get to know some faculty here, I got to get to know some other students, I got to get tied into the major that way. I think that's really important. So good.
All right.
This has been great. Thank you so much. Once again, this is Psyched for Careers, not Psyched for Grad School, not the podcast, but you should be watching and listening to those too, because there's good stuff. So this is Psyched for Careers. Thank you so much, Dr. Rusby. I really appreciate your coming.